continue these wonderful conversations, because this is at the end where the real magic happens. The panel discussions only give you content and input for exactly this wonderful conversations. After we spoke about the broad topic, we now want to go into a very specific, deeper one, into the question about accountability for Russia's aggressive war in Ukraine. And for that, I invite to the stage a wonderful panel moderated by William Pomeranz, who is the director of the Kennan Institute in Washington, D.C., a partner in one of the most important institutions in the field of researching Russia, but also specifically on legal history in Russia and legal questions. He has advised people in Russia, Ukraine, and of course also DC. Welcome on stage our wonderful moderator, William. And also I then invite directly on stage Kirsty Sutherland, head of the War and Crimes Committee of the International Bar Association, who has advised the ICC on several high-level cases that are of relevance also today, and of course has also dedicated time and work into the bar work in Ukraine and advising legal questions in Ukraine. Thank you very much for being with us. Then I want to invite two very prominent Russian scholars and lawyers. First, Sergey Golubok, of the nationality questions. Sergey Golubok, who is a very well-known lawyer and human rights defender, and Gleb Bogush, who also is a researcher on legal questions that will enrich this debate, and a lawyer and human rights defender. Very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And I thank all our panelists at the beginning. This has become a really important issue as to how to hold Russia accountable for its actions in Ukraine. And it has sparked a major legal debate, not only in terms of domestic law, especially in Ukraine, but also international law, including issues about the crime of aggression. We really haven't dealt with the crime of aggression since World War II and the Nuremberg trials. But this issue has been raised and has been discussed both in the United States and in Europe, and will be an important element as to how Russia can be held accountable. So we're just going to begin with questions to our panelists, who will deal with the issues that I've just discussed. But I want to turn it to Sergey first. And Sergey has been a signatory of the Brussels Declaration. And I think it would be great to hear what the Brussels Declaration stood for and what you hope to achieve by the Brussels Declaration.
Thanks, Will. Back in 1942, a number of German lawyers who found themselves in the United States started consultations with the State Department about what to do with the, as they were called, crimes against peace after the end of the war. And the discussions were not straightforward. It's recorded that Churchill, for example, wanted to proceed with the summary executions of the leaders of the Third Reich. The theoretical framework of the Nuremberg trials was, to the significant extent, prepared by the German lawyers and political scientists, such as Hans Kelsen, who were in the United States. They explained why crimes against peace were punishable crimes under both German and international law. And the State Department, the United States, provided them with their backing. It is something like this that we would like to start discussing now in terms of what repercussions on the international law field should follow for the leaders of the aggressive war. And here it's important to distinguish between state responsibility, and you mentioned, Will, Russia's responsibility, and individual criminal responsibility. In some respect, state responsibility is a shield for actual perpetrators. States are legal fiction. State responsibility, such as, for example, responsibility under the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, do not deal with the actual perpetrators. They are shielded by the state, by some, as I said, legal fiction, and taxpayers pay, not the personalities, individual persons who are behind the crimes. So what we wanted to achieve is to explain that a number of Russian lawyers support the initiative which were put forward by President Zelensky of Ukraine to establish an international tribunal to deal with the crime of aggression that will have jurisdiction to try individuals, members of the political and military leadership of the state's aggressors, and we are talking not only about Kremlin, we are talking also about Lukashenko. The tribunal which will have jurisdiction to deal with individual responsibility of those who are allegedly responsible for the crime of aggression, being a crime under both Russian, Ukrainian, and international law. And we express our position why it's as important for the Russian public as it is for Ukrainians and for Europeans. And let me just add one note, Will. You mentioned that this idea is discussed both in the United States and Europe. And in my opinion, it's important that it should be discussed outside of the United States and Europe. With all respect, Europe and the United States represent the minority of states. And the tribunal, which would have universal jurisdiction, is very important to provide also a narrative for countries of so-called Global South who may not have as unequivocal understanding of what is going on in Ukraine right now as we do. So that's why it's important to go beyond Europe and the United States, to talk to Indians, to talk to Africans, to talk to South Americans. Thanks.
So there's been a lot of discussion about the Global South and whether they are as engaged in this war as the Europeans and the United States. So from your perspective, how do you broaden the number of countries and nations that want to be engaged and will want to actually update this notion of crimes of aggression?
The whole idea of the crime of aggression is that not only direct victims are interested in the effective prosecution of those responsible, it's the crime against integrity of international law. Of course, Ukrainians are direct victims of the aggression. However, every single member of the international community should feel legal interest in prosecution of those responsible, because after all, if this crime goes unpunished, it shakes the very foundations of international law as we know it. And that's why this idea should be sold to various countries outside of Europe and the United States. In terms of being about integrity of international law, something that other countries, developing countries, small countries are actually benefiting from. So it's a common value that everyone should have an interest in protecting. And the role of the United States is pivotal. If United States openly support this initiative of Ukraine, I'm sure it will be a pivotal moment in terms of attitude outside of Europe.
So this is indeed a turning point in international law, and I'll turn to Gleb. From your perspective, how will international law change as a result of this war? Will the United States and France and so forth actually decide to become part of the jurisdiction of the ICC? Or will they adopt a crime of aggression, which they have never done before? Will they sign the Rome Statutes to facilitate that as well? So from your perspective, how does international law change, and what are the responsibilities for not only Russia, who would be implicated in such a charge, but other major powers as well?
Thanks, Will. I just add a note to what Sergey just said. So why we have this problem at all to prosecute the major crime that was indeed prosecuted in Nuremberg? It was crimes against peace. There was a major charge against the Nazi war criminals, the major war criminals who have been convicted in Nuremberg. And in the judgment, the International Military Tribunal said back to 1946 that it's not just a crime under international law. It's a supreme crime that accumulates the all evil of war. So it's different of other crimes that just it includes them. And that is precisely what we see in Ukraine. This war is absolutely horrific in terms of the human suffering. I would just mention the number of displaced persons from Ukraine. It's millions of people who have to leave their homes. And most of these people cannot be legally defined as victims of war crimes or crimes against humanity. But they are certainly the victims of the crime of aggression. We also should not forget about military, about Ukrainian soldiers who are defending their country in a lawful warfare. What they are doing is of self-defense, which is legal under United Nations Charter, which is legitimate under customary international law. They are defending their country. And they are killed in massive numbers by illegal use of force. So what Russia is doing is an act of aggression against international law. And they're all, of course, victims of this crime. There are also, of course, Russian victims as well. There are also victims of other nationalities. And there is a lot of other damage that this crime has brought to Europe and the world. And we have accountability gap because the International Criminal Court is not able to investigate this crime, not even prosecute the actual perpetrators, but even to open investigation on the aggression. Why? Because state parties of the International Criminal Court limited the jurisdiction of the court, and it's not able to prosecute. The court is not able to prosecute these crimes because Ukraine and Russia are not state parties. And it's precisely the countries of so-called global West, led by United States, who pushed for this regime. And this is all about this initiative. So this initiative of Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression is to fill this accountability gap. I think it's great that this debate, at least bring this debate back to the agenda. So I think it's the first result that's already achievable. Now we have the broad debate about amending the statute of the International Criminal Court. And I'm very glad to say that there is a massive support of state parties to bring the jurisdiction of the aggression along with other crimes. So in the future, in the potential situations, it would be possible to address the crime of aggression. Debate is ongoing. There is a strong position of so-called core group of states, the Friends of Ukraine, that support special tribunal. the initiative of special tribunal. We also have, I think, what in international law is called specially affected states that should be, I think, taken into account. There are countries which are immediately affected by the war, such as Baltic states, Poland, Romania, and some other states. And finally, we should not forget that states also have some flexibility to prosecute crime of aggression in their national courts with some significant limitations. But they can also prosecute persons who committed the crimes related to aggression. I just mentioned, for example, propaganda for war, which plays a significant role in this war. So that's something that states can do even now. I think this certainly will revive debates that we have. One of these debates about immunity of state officials. So how to treat the leaders of illegitimate regimes, how to treat dictators in terms of international law, how to rethink whether, for example, committing international crimes is a state function that international law should protect. So there are a lot of questions, a lot of issues that would be brought back to international agenda. So I think it would be the immediate result of this current debates.
So Gleb mentioned other countries that are implicated in this whole issues. I think we're going to next turn to Ukraine, since Ukraine has actually investigated and documented up to 100,000 war crimes. And so Kirsty, kind of talk about how Ukraine is approaching this issue and whether it will actually have access to international law or domestic law in order to prosecute these crimes.
Is this working? It is working. Yeah, well, earlier John was talking very eloquently about agency, empowerment, and resilience, and it struck me that perhaps all three of these is currently visible in Ukraine's admirable, painful efforts to build its domestic infrastructure and expertise in order to combat the incursion of Russian aggression on its own soil on a very, very granular level. In the work that I've been doing with my Ukrainian colleagues, I've just been really struck by their commitment to improving their kind of domestic best practices, and bearing in mind that they're not coming from a fully fledged, properly functioning, international standards meeting legal system to start with. I mean, the UN struggles to meet best practices at the international level, and suddenly Ukraine is being asked to, as a Ukrainian colleague put it, fly before it can walk. The training that they've asked for and we're trying to provide is to the judges, to the prosecutors, and I think perhaps most excruciatingly to the investigators, but most of all the defense lawyers. On a practical level, what are we actually asking the Ukrainians? What is the international community asking? What are the Ukrainians asking? These cases are incredibly difficult in ideal circumstances. And of course, the Ukrainians are not operating in ideal circumstances. That said, they do have the opportunity to collect evidence in real time. And they are being flooded, I hope, and as far as I can see, with enormous support and practical resourcing. But these cases are evidentially, practically, and emotionally extraordinarily challenging. They're hard enough for a distanced practitioner such as myself. When I deal with international crimes, I'm doing it as a non-national, from a non-affected state. And I have the benefit of the distance of time and location, but it's unimaginable to be trying to defend the attackers in your own community. And I kind of wonder, I mean, can the Ukrainians realistically seek to defend people and kind of meet the international standards of a fair trial? And should we be asking them to? And I think that that's where interesting questions come into play about the role of the evidence collection and what the best use of that evidence is, and the relationship with the ICC and domestic prosecutions in other states. So I think that that's something that we need to start thinking about. And the incredible volumes of evidence collection that are being done in pursuance of these 100,000 cases, which would overload any system, let alone one trying to operate in conflict. One thing that isn't apparently being done is using that evidence and stepping back from it and not rushing to prosecute kind of first-level perpetrators immediately, but to perform strategic investigations. And the question I had immediately when I was hearing this talked about was, well, how on earth do you do that when it's still ongoing and it's the blur of conflict and you've got other priorities? But this is being done. This is being done during an ongoing conflict. It's being done with the Syria mechanism, being done by the Syria mechanism. And I wonder if this is where the Ukrainian authorities can seek a degree of efficiency that takes the burden, both the practical, financial, but also the emotional burden, away from its overburdened legal system, and can contribute in a very manifest way to the ICC's efforts in the slightly longer term, and ultimately contribute to any aggression tribunal should one come into existence.
Thank you. So when I talk to other practitioners and think tank people and policymakers and so forth, the question that always comes out, both in terms of prosecuting in Ukraine and prosecuting against the crime of aggression, is that there are so many legal hoops that we have to go through in order to actually get to this process. So how do we sustain these prosecutions, these crimes, when, quite frankly, the legal architecture still is not in place? So.
Ooh, well, I mean, I think that in the context, as we've been hearing, of the reinvigoration of the interest in prosecuting the crime of aggression, this is being accompanied by an exploration of the other forms of accountability that are available, which the legal infrastructure does accommodate. They attract varying degrees of practicality and symbolic value. And the ones I'm thinking of are kind of economic measures, so sanctions, and we've seen a kind of rush of those from the West. I don't know how effective they are, but they certainly hold important symbolic value and emotional value, as Vladimir Kara-Murz's family call increasingly for more and more sanctions. There's the personal, of course, and then there's the political, and I wonder if we're not exploring this enough, but I mean the sort of commissions of inquiry and the fact-finding missions that the UN organs can perform. I mean, are they effective? Are they useful? I suspect they're useful in the kind of concentration on human rights patterns and violations, but I'm not so sure. That didn't really answer your question, did it? Sorry.
Well, let Sergey and Gleb jump in here as well.
Thank you. Just to build upon what you've mentioned, Kirsty, the United Nations Commissions of Inquiry, we have the Independent Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, and it produced a number of reports, most recently so-called conference paper, quite comprehensive body of evidence. And in my opinion, those commissions are useful and worth money being spent on them only if there is an accountability mechanism. The commission itself is not an accountability mechanism. And this accountability mechanism can be either domestic or international. Ukrainian proceedings are important, but as you mentioned, first, the system is overburdened. Second, as you said, it's unimaginable to think of the effective defense work. And without effective defense work, fair justice is unimaginable. Without fair justice, the whole exercise does not make sense and is counterproductive. That is why we need to establish international accountability mechanisms. And we have only one, the International Criminal Court, with certain limitations on jurisdiction that Gleb explained, particularly concerning the crime of aggression. That is why we need to establish a new accountability mechanism on an international level, international tribunal, dealing with the crime of aggression specifically, and reinforce the International Criminal Court. And I think we should start asking questions why, for more than 1.5 years of investigation, the prosecutor of ICC came up with only 2 arrest warrants. The taxpayers should be interested about the results of the investigation so far. The prosecutor has a policy of limiting information about ongoing prosecutions. Fair enough. However, balance of transparency and confidentiality should be maintained. And so far, outside of the very limited, important but limited context of deportation of children, we are not aware of any activities insofar as Bucha massacre is concerned, very well documented. And I particularly refer to very good visual investigation by New York Times, particularly on what happened there. Like, in my opinion, that's a good practice of how it should be done. And other well-documented crimes which fall under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. So far, it has not been done. And I think we should start asking questions. And we should start demanding answers. Because without international accountability, after the end of the war, there is a huge risk that the false narratives of what actually happened would continue. And particularly among the public in the Russian Federation or in the Global South or elsewhere, the most important contribution of judicial process is establishing the narrative on the basis of adversarial proceedings for the world to see. Thanks.
Yeah. Just that a few things. So first, International Criminal Court should be mentioned, I think, in this respect. It has a profound role. Is actually the only international court that has jurisdiction over the international crimes, for the only exception of the crime of aggression. And it's already conducting investigation that was triggered by the referral of 43 states, significant number of states, not exclusively so-called Western states, by the way. And so this is not only taxpayers' money, which is also was additional funding on this particular investigation, which is maybe not the best idea to finance particular investigation, but it's still symbolic because it's a special support of states of the ICC. And we definitely need a more proactive role from the court. The court itself based on so-called principle of complementarity. So it's a complement to national jurisdictions. So the national jurisdiction should play leading role, and only when they are not able or not willing to prosecute. So in Ukrainian case, we have a strong will to prosecute, investigate and prosecute, and to establish truth in the courts. But Ukraine is objectively not able to process all this number of crimes. Ukraine is not able to bring responsible persons to trials. They can only conduct, in most cases, in absentia proceedings, which are both non-effective and had dubious legal value. So that's why the role of the court is so-called positive complementarity. It should trigger developments on the national level, not only in Ukraine, but also in other countries. So, and as arrest warrants, as regards arrest warrants, I think we have also to ask what is inside these warrants. I think for public, it's very important to see charges in more detail than they are now available. We are not able to read what is inside, even if some information is sensitive. I think the public has legitimate questions about that, and I think we badly need other ideas about prosecution. This is I wouldn't like to downplay the importance of the deportation of children, which is horrific crime, but we have a lot of other episodes in this war where we have the blatant impunity. We have the impunity which lies in the center of this practice, and this is why International Criminal Court is needed to prevent and to put an end to impunity. So I think International Criminal Court plays a larger role in this mechanism, but we also have to understand that there is one significant part of this justice, post-war justice, post-conflict justice, and this is Russia. So without Russian courts, real courts, not like we have the courts that we have now, any accountability process would be incomplete. So we have to understand that, but without this part, we need to use all the available mechanisms. And I would also like to invite all observers, all media, to read carefully the reports of the International Commission of Inquiry. It's a very professional job done by best experts in the field. And the last document, which is this conference room paper, so 170 pages, it has very impressive section on accountability. And very importantly, it's not only about trials. So accountability is the word which has many meanings, and also it's not about criminal responsibility only. It's about compensations. It's about memorialization. It's about the guarantees of non-repetition, and that we have to understand that criminal law doesn't have answers to all these questions. So we have to look to the future and to understand that this is indispensable part of any peaceful future that we all, I think, want to achieve.
So I want to get back to this issue of empire, which is obviously one of the main issues of this forum. And Russian legal historians have written about empire recently, and they've emphasized that the driving force of empire is territorial expansion. We've also now seen a new history textbook in Russia, where they've emphasized the notion of the state, and that the Russian state is its own civilization. So from your perspective, how do we deal with this? Is this just simply, will this simply go away when Putin goes away? Or are these issues going to have some resonance even in a post-Putin era, whenever that comes? Sergey.
Thank you, Will. I think this is a very useful framework. I think post-colonial or post-imperial look at what is happening, including in terms of Russian law, is very helpful and methodically right approach. What I would like to add is that in terms of empire, we should look not only at non-Russian regions of Russia, which have been colonized. such as republics of North Caucasus or Yakutia, which was mentioned yesterday, or Tiva. We should also look at the parts of the territory of the Russian Federation where ethnically majority are Russian-speaking people or Russians. However, they have strong regional identities. And as things stand now, they're being colonized by Moscow, by the federal center, in terms of taxes, in terms of representation, in terms of criminal law, which is all federal. There is no opportunity like in the United States or in the United Kingdom to have devolution in terms of criminal law. Think about Kaliningrad as colonized territory. Think about St. Petersburg as colonized territory, etc. So this colonization does not have only ethnical dimension. It also has other dimensions. And it can be constructed in terms of over-centralization of all processes that are happening, including in terms of law. And I think it's consensus now that any meaningful legal reform in Russia should include meaningful federalization and devolution of powers, including in criminal law and criminal procedure, to the regions. So, for example, something may be a crime in Chechnya and not be a crime in St. Petersburg, as it happens in the United States, or in Nigeria to that extent, and other federal states. And it's really important. So this imperial framework, or post-colonial framework, or colonial framework is really important, and it does not have, in my opinion, only ethnic repercussions. It has other repercussions as well. Thanks.
As regards criminal law, I beg to differ because I think it's this idea that Chechnya would have some special crimes. I think I would call it controversial idea. I mean, I think we already had. The Soviet Union had the same system, and I don't think it was a pretty good experience in terms of the federal federal system of criminal law. But more generally, I agree that this is inevitable to talk about empire and decolonization and all these matters, but we also have to look maybe more closely to more immediate future, immediate past of the country. So the role of the Soviet Union and we need still to divorce Russia from the Soviet Union. I think this is something that still haunts us in terms of a lot of legal atavisms from the Soviet era, a lot of misunderstanding about the relationship actually between Russia and the Soviet Union. I think we have a lot of problems that come from that because of this question has not been properly resolved. So it's about not only about the legal continuity or succession. It's also about symbolic continuity. So what is the actual Russia now? So what should be Russia? How Russia relates to Russian Empire? How it relates to the states that existed in Russia on the territory of Russian Federation before? How it relates to the Soviet Union. This is, I think, it's a very important question. Also, it has also legal dimension. And I think this is something that we have to discuss seriously, maybe not focusing entirely on the one framework, which I think has of course grounds. We had this empire, but probably we should have to look at this question with other lenses as well. So this is my kind of word of caution in this regard.
Thank you very much. Last question to Kirsty before we open it up for the audience. You mentioned that the Ukrainian legal system really doesn't have the capacity to do all these types of trials. How is the international community trying to help Ukraine in order to better the Ukrainian legal system and to assist it in terms of being able to deal with such a huge number of cases?
That's an enormous question. I know that the Ukrainians are asking for and receiving a lot of support from a lot of different actors. The work that I've seen being done is working directly with the judiciary and with the on-the-ground prosecutors and defense lawyers to help them understand the peculiarities that come with trials involving the types of evidence that they may not be very familiar with, the forensics on weaponry, the dealing with people who've been bear the marks of torture, psychological and physical. Defending people themselves who may have very severe psychological traumatic impacts, which will severely limit their ability to participate in a trial, which has obviously fair trial implications. So very much a granular, on-the-ground, practical advice on dealing with that. That doesn't help with the volume of cases. One of the, I think, most important features, perhaps, has been the moral support, just the understanding and the recourse. We've been doing work on reviewing judgments to see how they accord with best practice standards and with minimal fair trial standards in order to help the judiciary refine its practices. I think one of the things that I would be worried about is doing these cases too quickly to the point where you impede their kind of credibility. I think as the cases amass, we need to be looking at whether these trials are held outside Ukraine. And I know that Germany is a real leading light in universal jurisdiction cases in the modern era. Other countries like Sweden are also, and the Netherlands are also admirable in their efforts. And I just wonder if that's an avenue to help alleviate the burden on Ukraine.
Okay, we're going to open it up for questions, and right here.
Am I audible? Yes. My name is Salim Amin, and I'm policy advisor at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And I come from a background of international criminal law. So I was, one of the questions that comes to my mind always, and I face that question as a lawyer, is what is our responsibility as a lawyer when we are working at the field of international criminal law, is to present the correct and real narrative of international criminal law. And that's one of the dangers that we have right now. Countries will be trying to change the principles to new narratives based on politics. So I was a bit struck to listen that Europe is not the best place for the investigation and prosecution of the crimes. Because if, as a lawyer, when I see that is the principle of, for example, geographical profiling, it's very important when we are investigating. So we have to differentiate first between human rights investigation and international criminal law investigation. They're very different, because the threshold we need for international criminal investigation, it's higher, it needs more evidence. So geographical connection is very important to get to that level of threshold. So I'll tell to our guests that I think it's very important to have this connection. And second one, I think the crimes that are happening in Ukraine by Russian soldiers, aggressively, brutally, and I would mention that I know that there's not clear-cut hierarchy at the international level for international law, but we still have concepts like just Kogan's preemptive norms of international law that they come first. So I would say individual criminal responsibility comes first. It is very clear-cut. We have the accountability mechanisms. The ICC is there. We need only to support it. We need to show our will. And as Kirsty mentioned, we have to also use national jurisdiction as the universal jurisdiction. For example, the structural investigation by the German government, at the prosecution office. So we have the accountability mechanisms, and I think we have to differentiate between how people lose their lives and not to divert from the, let's say, real understanding of law and bring like state immunity. This is one of the challenges for international criminal law, but our responsibility as lawyers is very important to bring the real narrative, and I thank you very much. It was just a comment.
Anyone want to comment on the comment?
One comment I had, sorry, in response, was about the disinformation power that Russia holds and the narrative setting. It's a problem and an opportunity for the International Criminal Court and other criminal accountability efforts is to counter that.
Okay.
I agree fully with what you said, with one reservation. Lawyers should not overestimate their powers. It's very typical for lawyers to do that, particularly if we look at the, for example, political life of the United States, where there are so many lawyers involved. And sometimes it doesn't help.
And sometimes you can't find one.
Excuse me, I have to say that I think this is our responsibility. You mentioned it does not help the politics, so I will take it from you. What you said is it is important to be on the judicial side, see as a crime, and don't bring the political narratives.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But then, if crime is a crime, it's not a crime unless it is established by a competent tribunal. Like, you and I cannot say that crimes are being committed until you have the guilty verdict upheld on appeal if necessary. And that's why it's important to have domestic proceedings in Ukraine, to have domestic proceedings in other countries, to have international proceedings, and then we have accountability gap for the crime of aggression, particularly if the head of state is concerned.
No. No, we have other questions, please.
Excuse me, I would say crime of aggression is defined, look at the Rome Statute. Why we need more definitions? I'm sorry, I talked too much, so I will stop now.
Any other questions? Right over here.
Yeah, hello again. My name is Nikita. I'm a political scientist and political journalist. I want to address a question on how to take accountable not only Russia as a body, not only key figures like key propagandistic figures, key military generals, so people who are obvious in charge, but how to press charges on regular soldiers who committed war crimes. Because when I was working in Bosnia, and we had a case of Rwanda when a lot of soldiers, like regular soldiers who actually committed war crimes, they left without any responsibility because it was too complicated to somehow define their guilt and to clarify who was involved. So how to take accountable not only high figures, but also all the people who were involved in such crime. Thank you.
Go ahead.
May I start? Thank you for the question. I think it's very important to put this debate in the to some legal frame. You know, soldiers, not only foot soldiers, but generally, you know, military, they are not responsible for the aggression. You know, so whether the war is legal or not is, to say very roughly, is not for them to decide, you know. So they are protected by international humanitarian law, so-called combatant immunity, and it makes sense. The very idea to blame thousands of, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, people as all war criminals, which is real danger when we use this rhetoric that, for example, all soldiers are war criminals. They are not, and that's important to understand. But for all other crimes, including crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, of course, there is no law, there is no limits, you know. So any soldier can be found responsible. Any civilian can be found responsible for these crimes. And this is difficulty, and you mentioned the case of Balkans, the Yugoslavian wars, and in this case, yes, majority of perpetrators were not tried, were not convicted. That's true, and it's true for every larger conflict. It's inevitable truth of the war justice. But there are ways to at least to represent the criminality and to bring the key perpetrators to account. And of course, in this case, I'm convinced it would not be possible without changes in Russia, without the establishing of the institutions in Russia. But some soldiers, Russian soldiers, also some officers have been already tried by Ukrainian courts. There are also some proceedings which are currently in absentia. So, for example, on the sexual violence crimes, also in Ukrainian courts. There would be more and more such cases. But yes, this is the problem. The problem that we need to not just punish people, but to make it clear to them and to general public. And this is a function that was Sergey just said. That this is the function of the judicial proceeding. So we cannot just write all these reports, publish reports. This is very important. I wouldn't like to downplay the enormous activity of civil society organizations. Not first of all, of course, Ukrainians, but also there are a lot of activities in other European countries, and also Russian researchers do their work. But what we need the trials. We need judicial proceedings, and this is the key element. So there can be different ways to do this, and not only trials, maybe also truth commissions. It's a lot of things to come to mind. But we need to expose as more crimes as we can.
Right here.
Kristina Shenok, Office of Belarus Democratic Forces in the Czech Republic. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a court interpreter, so pretty close to the field of law. My question will be not about tribunals, but about the mechanism of universal jurisdiction. Do you think it's just a pure law mechanism, or it's about political will? As we are based in the Czech Republic, I will give the example of Czechia. We have 10 victims of Lukashenko's regime. Those are the people who know the names of those who committed crimes against humanity against them, but there is no case started, in spite of the fact that we filed some of these cases. Because there is a lack of political will. So do you think, speaking about EU countries, this mechanism is really effective and it's only about the law, or it's about politics?
I mean, I think it won't happen without widespread political will, and its legitimacy and its efficacy ultimately relies on the breadth and the depth of that political will, unfortunately.
Yes, I think there was already mentioned that there are a lot of legal challenges before universal jurisdiction. So basically, the most countries require the presence of the accused in the state where the trials took place. The most of them are not allowing universal jurisdiction trials in absentia. So there are objective reasons. And of course, there is a risk that multiple proceedings without real effect would discredit the idea. So this is what lies on surface, I think. So this is why I would exercise also caution about that. And this is also important in this debate about, collective West versus collective South, because of course in this case it can be exposed a lot by the propaganda that this is just, the part of the geopolitical pressure and geopolitical crusade that the West that is using all available courts as a power tool. So this is I think what stops governments and some governments from more active use of that. But this is the role of civil society in all of these countries to push on that. It's always a struggle between realpolitik considerations and the considerations of justice. And in this case, it's also about peace, actually. So, I strongly believe that all justice efforts approach peace, not make it more distant. So this is important to understand what is at stake.
Thanks very much. I think we've reached the lunchtime hour, and so I want to thank all of our panelists. And I also want to just say a word about the role of Ukraine and Russia in transitional justice. During 1917, a long time ago, Russia and the provisional government formed an extraordinary commission that dealt with the crimes of the autocracy. And unfortunately, it was closed down after the Bolshevik Revolution, but it played a major role, and indeed, historically, really represented the first truth commission of the 20th century. I also would want to emphasize the important role of jurists from Ukraine at Nuremberg. If you want to learn more about it, I recommend the book by Philippe Sands, East-West Street, where he talks about Ukrainian jurists who've basically formulated the issues of genocide and crimes against humanity. So this part of the region has played a very important but understated role in the issue of transitional justice. And I think that it will now play a very important role going forward into the 21st century. So with that, I think we are adjourned and ready for lunch.
Thank you so much, Will, for this wonderful moderation, and you're all invited for lunch.